My name is Rosa and I am 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood beside my father's freshly dug grave, tears streaming down my face, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. That was when my husband Derek walked up to me and handed me an envelope. I thought it was a sympathy card, maybe a note from someone who could not attend the funeral. Instead, it was divorce papers. He wanted me to sign right there at my father's burial. He expected me to crumble, to beg, to fall apart completely. But something inside me shifted. I took out a pen, placed the papers on my father's headstone, and signed without a single word. The look on Derek's face in that moment told me everything. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. Before I take you deeper into this story, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you have ever been betrayed at your lowest moment, tap that like button. And please subscribe, because what happened after I signed those papers will stay with you long after this video ends. Trust me, you will want to hear how this unfolds. Let me take you back to where my story truly begins. I grew up in a small coastal town called Cedarville, nestled along the rugged shores of Oregon. Our community was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the rhythm of life followed the tides, and where generations of families made their living from the sea and the forests that surrounded us. The air always carried the scent of salt and pine, mingling together in a way that smelled like home, to me even now. My father Henry was a third-generation woodworker. His father and grandfather before him had built furniture with their hands, creating pieces that families passed down through generations. My father took that legacy and transformed it into something bigger. He started Harrison Woodworks in our garage when I was just a toddler, and by the time I was in high school, he had grown it into a proper workshop with 15 employees and clients from all over the Pacific Northwest. My mother, Evelyn, was the warmth of our household. She worked as a librarian at the local elementary school and spent her free time tending to her garden and baking cookies for every church event and school fundraiser. She had a way of making everyone feel welcome, of turning strangers into friends, with nothing more than a smile and a slice of her famous apple pie. But when I was 12 years old, my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. The disease moved faster than any of us could have prepared for. Within 8 months, she was gone. I remember standing at her funeral, holding my father's hand on one side and my younger brother Thomas's hand on the other, wondering how we would possibly survive without her. My father became both parents after that. He learned to cook meals beyond scrambled eggs and toast. He figured out how to braid my hair by watching tutorial videos on the computer at the library. He showed up to every school play, every track meet, every parent-teacher conference, even when he had orders to fill and deadlines to meet. He never once made us feel like we were a burden or an inconvenience. Thomas was 3 years younger than me, and we handled our grief in different ways. I threw myself into school and helping at the workshop, finding comfort in structure and purpose. Thomas retreated into music, spending hours in his room with a guitar our father had made for him, strumming sad melodies that echoed through the walls. We grew apart in some ways during those years, each of us building our own coping mechanisms, our own ways of navigating a world without our mother. My father and I developed a special bond through work. From the time I was old enough to hold a sanding block, I spent my weekends and summers at the workshop. I loved the smell of fresh-cut lumber, the sound of planes smoothing rough boards, the satisfaction of watching a shapeless piece of wood transform into something beautiful and functional. My father taught me to identify different types of wood by their grain and weight: oak for strength, walnut for elegance, cherry for warmth, cedar for its resistance to rot and insects. Each species had its own personality, its own strengths and weaknesses, and learning to work with them felt like learning a secret language that only a few people understood. By the time I was in high school, I was helping with more than just manual labor. I learned the business side of things too: invoicing customers, managing inventory, negotiating with suppliers. My father never pushed me toward the family business, but he made sure I had all the skills I would need if I chose that path. And I did choose it. When I graduated high school as valedictorian of my class, I enrolled at Oregon State University to study business administration. My plan was simple: learn everything I could about running a company, then come home and help my father take Harrison Woodworks to the next level. Thomas took a different path. He had no interest in sawdust and order forms. After high school, he moved to Los Angeles to pursue his dream of becoming a professional musician. Our father supported him completely, even though I could see the disappointment hidden behind his encouraging words. He had hoped both his children would carry on the family legacy, but he loved us enough to let us choose our own paths. I finished my degree in 4 years and moved back to Cedarville immediately after graduation. My father welcomed me into the business as his co-manager, teaching me everything he knew, while slowly stepping back to let me take the reins. Those were some of the happiest years of my life. Working alongside my father every day, building something meaningful, honoring the traditions of our family, while pushing forward into new territory. I thought I had everything figured out. A career I loved, a father who was my best friend, a community that felt like an extended family. I could not imagine wanting anything more. And then Derek Foster walked into my life. Derek came to Cedarville on a Tuesday afternoon in September. I remember the day clearly because we had just received our biggest order ever, a contract to furnish an entire boutique hotel in Bend with custom-made furniture. I was in the middle of calculating lumber needs when the front door of our showroom opened and a man in an expensive-looking suit walked in. He was handsome in a polished city way that stood out sharply against the rugged aesthetics of our small town. Tall, dark-haired, clean-shaven, with the kind of confident posture that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any room. He introduced himself as Derek Foster, an architect from Portland, and explained that he was designing an eco-resort for investors in the area. He needed locally sourced handcrafted furniture for the project, and someone had recommended Harrison Woodworks. Would we be interested in submitting a proposal? I showed him around the workshop, explaining our process, introducing him to some of our craftsmen, letting the quality of our work speak for itself. Derek asked intelligent questions, seemed genuinely impressed by what he saw, and by the end of the tour, we had scheduled a meeting to discuss specifications and pricing. That meeting turned into dinner. Dinner turned into drinks. Drinks turned into him asking for my phone number. Before I knew what was happening, Derek Foster was pursuing me with an intensity I had never experienced before. He was charming in ways the men of Cedarville were not. He knew about art and architecture and wine and travel. He told stories about projects he had worked on in San Francisco and Seattle, about clients who owned mansions and yachts, about a world so different from my small-town existence that it felt like listening to fairy tales. He sent flowers to the workshop, extravagant arrangements that made my coworkers tease me mercilessly. He showed up with fancy coffee from Portland when he came for meetings. He took me to restaurants in the city where the menus did not have prices, and the waiters called us by name. My father was not impressed. I noticed his hesitation from the beginning. When I brought Derek home for dinner, my father was polite, but distant. When I talked excitedly about our dates, he listened without comment. When I asked him what he thought of Derek, he chose his words carefully. "There is something too smooth about him," my father said one evening as we closed up the workshop together. "Like a piece of furniture that has been lacquered so many times you cannot see the wood underneath. You cannot tell if it is solid or if it is hiding flaws." I dismissed his concerns. My father was protective, I told myself. He would be suspicious of any man who came after his daughter. Derek was different from the boys I had dated in high school, yes, but that was a good thing. He had ambition, sophistication, experience. He was exactly the kind of man I should be with if I wanted to grow beyond Cedarville. Derek and I dated for a year. During that time, the eco-resort project fell through due to funding issues, but Derek found other reasons to visit Cedarville regularly. He was attentive and romantic, always planning surprises, always making me feel special. When he proposed to me in a fancy restaurant in Portland with a string quartet playing in the background and a ring that must have cost a fortune, I said yes without hesitation. We got married 6 months later. The ceremony was held at Harrison Woodworks, surrounded by the tables and chairs my father had spent his life creating. My father walked me down the aisle, and I could see the worry in his eyes, even as he smiled for the photographers. But I was too blinded by love to pay attention. After the wedding, Derek convinced me to move to Portland. His career was there, he argued. The opportunities were better. Cedarville was too small, too limited, too stuck in the past. I could manage the workshop, remotely fly back once a month for important meetings. It would be fine. So I left. I left the town where I had grown up, the business I had helped build, the father who had been my best friend for 30 years. I told myself it was temporary, that we would eventually move back, that I was not abandoning anything, just expanding my horizons. I was wrong about so many things. The first signs of trouble appeared within months of our wedding. Derek began to criticize my involvement with Harrison Woodworks. At first, the comments were subtle, almost joking. Why did I spend so much time on phone calls with the workshop? Did I really need to fly back every month? Was I not more interested in building a life in Portland than babysitting my father's retirement project? I brushed off his remarks, attributing them to adjustment issues. Marriage was a transition, I told myself. We were both learning to balance our individual lives with our shared one. Things would settle down, but they did not settle. They escalated. Derek grew increasingly resentful of the time I devoted to the family business. He mocked the furniture we made, calling it rustic at best and primitive at worst. He suggested that I was wasting my education on a dying industry when I could be working for one of the big design firms in Portland. He implied that my attachment to my father was unhealthy, that I needed to cut the cord and become my own person. I started making excuses for him. He was stressed about work. He felt neglected. He just wanted more of my attention. If I tried harder, if I balanced things better, he would come around. Then my father called with the news that changed everything. It was a Wednesday morning, and I was in the middle of a meeting with a potential client when my phone buzzed with my father's number. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Rosie," he said, using the nickname he had called me since childhood. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm." Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctors were not optimistic. I do not remember much of the next few hours. I know I canceled the rest of my meetings. I know I went home and started packing a bag. I know I called Derek and told him I was going to Cedarville to be with my father. His response still echoes in my memory. "For how long?" he asked, as if I had announced a business trip rather than a family emergency. "For as long as it takes," I said. "He is my father, Derek. He is dying." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Derek spoke again, his voice was cold. "You are going to put your career on hold for someone who is already dying. That seems like a waste." I hung up without responding. I drove to Cedarville that same day and did not look back. The next 8 months were the hardest of my life. I moved into my childhood home and became my father's primary caregiver. I held his hand through chemotherapy treatments that left him weak and nauseous. I learned to manage medications and monitor symptoms and navigate the endless bureaucracy of insurance and medical appointments. Derek came to visit twice during those 8 months. Both times he stayed less than 48 hours. Both times he complained about the slow pace of small-town life, the lack of decent restaurants, the fact that I was always focused on my father instead of him. "He has nurses," Derek said during his second visit. "He has hospice care. Why do you need to be here every single day?" "Because he is my father," I replied, "and I love him." Derek looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Annoyance, maybe, or something colder, something calculating. A month before my father passed away, he asked to speak with me privately. We sat together in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and materials of his life's work, the smell of sawdust and wood stain hanging in the air like incense. "I need to tell you about my will," he said. He had left everything to me and Thomas. The workshop, the house, the land, all the equipment and inventory. Thomas would receive his share as a cash buyout since he had no interest in running the business. I would inherit Harrison Woodworks in its entirety, along with the family home and the surrounding property. The total value of the estate was approximately $2 million. "There is something else," my father said, his voice serious. "I have had my lawyer set up a special trust. Everything I am leaving you will be classified as separate property, not community property. Do you understand what that means?" I nodded slowly. In Oregon, separate property belonged only to the individual, not to the marriage. If Derek and I ever divorced, he would have no claim to my inheritance. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. My father looked at me with eyes that saw more than I wanted him to see. "Because I love you," he said simply, "and because I need to know you will be protected when I am gone." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was wrong about Derek, but something in his gaze stopped me. My father had never steered me wrong before. Even if I could not see the danger he sensed, I trusted his instincts. "Okay," I said. "Thank you." He squeezed my hand. "Never forget your worth, Rosie. Do not let anyone make you forget." 3 weeks later, he was gone. The morning of my father's funeral dawned gray and cold. I woke up in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling I had stared at 1,000 times before trying to comprehend that my father would never knock on my door again, never call me Rosie, never be there to catch me when I fell. I dressed in a black suit that my father had once complimented at a business function. "You look like a CEO," he had said, beaming with pride. I applied minimal makeup, just enough to cover the dark circles from weeks of sleepless nights. I pulled my hair back in a simple twist and looked at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. The grief had carved new lines around my eyes, new shadows beneath my cheekbones. But there was something else there, too. A hardness I had not possessed before. A steeliness that had formed without my conscious awareness. The funeral was held at the small church my family had attended for generations. The pews were packed with people from all corners of my father's life. Craftsmen who had worked for him for decades, customers who had become friends over countless orders, neighbors who remembered him as a young father raising 2 children alone after his wife's death. Thomas had flown in from Los Angeles the day before. We sat together in the front pew, not speaking much, united in our grief. Derek sat on my other side, dressed impeccably in a dark suit that probably cost more than most people in that church earned in a month. He checked his phone 3 times during the service. The eulogies were beautiful, story after story of my father's kindness, his integrity, his dedication to craftsmanship and community. I spoke last standing at the podium with trembling hands, trying to find words adequate to describe the man who had shaped everything I was. My father taught me that the true measure of a person is not what they accumulate, but what they create, I said. Not what they take, but what they give. He built furniture that will outlast us, all pieces that will be passed down through families for generations. But more importantly, he built a legacy of integrity and love that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. After the service, we drove in a procession to the cemetery on the edge of town. The burial was brief. A few more prayers, a few more words, and then the sound of dirt hitting the casket, a sound I knew I would hear in my nightmares for years to come. People began to drift away, heading to the community hall where food had been prepared. I stayed behind, standing at the edge of the grave, unable to leave, unable to accept that this was real. That was when Derek approached me. He did not put his arm around me or offer words of comfort. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. "Here," he said, holding it out to me. I looked at the envelope, confused. "What is this? Just take it." I took the envelope and opened it with numb fingers. Inside was a stack of legal documents. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Divorce papers. My husband was serving me divorce papers at my father's funeral. "I have already filled everything out," Derek said, his voice businesslike, as if we were discussing a contract negotiation rather than the end of our marriage. "All you need to do is sign and we can get this processed quickly. My lawyer says it should be finalized within a few months." I stared at the papers, then at Derek. His face showed no remorse, no hesitation, nothing resembling the man who had charmed me with flowers and fancy dinners just 4 years ago. "Why now?" I heard myself ask. "Because of the timing," he said matter-of-factly. "Your father's estate. If we file now before it goes through probate, I have a stronger claim to a portion of those assets. Oregon is an equitable distribution state. We have been married for 4 years. A judge could decide I am entitled to a significant share." Everything clicked into place. The charming courtship, the pressure to move to Portland, the resentment of my involvement with the family business, the sudden attentiveness when he learned about my father's illness, the calculated timing of this moment when I was at my lowest, most vulnerable point. Derek had never loved me. He had been waiting for this, waiting for my father to die so he could take what he believed was rightfully his. I thought about my father's warning, the lacquered furniture hiding flaws beneath, the trust fund he had created to protect me, the last words he had spoken to me, "Never forget your worth." Something shifted inside me. The grief did not disappear, but it moved aside, making room for a cold, clear understanding. I had been a fool, but I did not have to stay one. I looked at Derek. I looked at the grave behind him, where my father's body was being covered with earth. I looked at the papers in my hands. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a pen. Derek's eyes widened slightly. He had expected crying, begging a scene that would give him leverage. He had not expected this. I walked to my father's headstone, a temporary marker that would be replaced with something permanent in the coming weeks. I placed the divorce papers flat against the stone and signed my name at the bottom. I signed without tears, without trembling, without a single word of protest. When I finished, I straightened up and handed the papers back to Derek. "There," I said. "Is that everything?" For the first time since I had known him, Derek looked uncertain. The confident facade cracked just for a moment, revealing something like confusion underneath. "That is it?" he asked. "That is it." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone beside my father's grave. I did not look back. The days following the funeral passed in a blur of grief and paperwork. Thomas stayed in Cedarville for a week before he had to return to Los Angeles for work. We spent most of that time sorting through our father's belongings, dividing up the personal items, making decisions about what to keep and what to donate. It was painful work, but having my brother there made it bearable. I told Thomas about the divorce papers on the second night after the funeral. We were sitting on the back porch of our childhood home drinking beer and watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Thomas's reaction was immediate and visceral. He wanted to drive to Portland and confront Derek. He wanted to hire the most aggressive lawyer in Oregon. He wanted to make Derek pay for what he had done. I understood his anger. I felt it too burning somewhere deep beneath the numbness. But I also knew that revenge would not solve anything. Derek had shown me exactly who he was. The best thing I could do was remove him from my life as quickly and completely as possible. 2 days after Thomas left, I had a meeting with Richard Palmer, my father's attorney. Richard had known our family for over 30 years. He had handled my parents' estate planning after my mother died, had advised my father through countless business decisions, and had become something like an uncle to me over the years. When I walked into his office, he stood and hugged me before we even said hello. "Your father was one of the best men I have ever known," Richard said as we sat down. "This town will not be the same without him." "I know," I said. "Neither will I." We spent the first part of the meeting reviewing the standard probate process. My father had done an excellent job organizing his affairs, so there were no surprises or complications. The estate would be settled within a few months, and everything would transfer to me and Thomas as specified. Then Richard leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a knowing expression. "There is something else I need to tell you," he said. Something about the special provisions your father requested. I already knew about the trust fund that protected my inheritance from being considered community property, but Richard had more to share. 3 weeks before he died, my father had come to Richard with specific concerns about my marriage. He had done some research into Derek's background research that revealed a pattern of behavior I had never suspected. Derek had been married once before to a woman named Susan, whose family owned a successful real estate company in Seattle. The marriage lasted 2 years before ending in a contentious divorce. Susan had accused Derek of financial manipulation and emotional abuse, but had ultimately settled out of court to end the legal battle quickly. After the divorce, Derek had targeted several other wealthy women, engaging in relationships that conveniently coincided with financial windfalls or family inheritances. None of those relationships had progressed to marriage, but the pattern was clear. Derek was a predator who sought out vulnerable women with money. My father had taken all this information and used it to create an ironclad legal structure around my inheritance. The trust fund he had established was bulletproof. Even if Derek's lawyers tried to challenge it, they would not succeed. "Your father wanted you to know the truth," Richard said, "but he also did not want to tell you while he was dying. He was afraid you would be distracted by anger when you needed to focus on him." I sat in Richard's office absorbing this information, feeling the last remnants of my illusions about Derek crumble to dust. "How did he know?" I asked. "How did he figure this out?" "He said he could see it in the man's eyes," Richard replied. "The way Derek looked at you versus the way he looked at the workshop, the house, the land. Your father said Derek's eyes lit up when talking about property values, but went flat when talking about you." That sounded exactly like my father. Always watching, always paying attention, always seeing what others missed. "There is one more thing," Richard said. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in my father's handwriting. "He asked me to give this to you after everything was settled." I took the envelope with shaking hands. Whatever was inside, I was not ready to read it. Not yet. But I tucked it into my purse like a talisman, a final gift from the man who had protected me, even from beyond the grave. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into uncovering more about Derek's true nature. I hired a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. What he found was staggering. Derek's architectural firm was on the verge of bankruptcy, buried under debt from failed projects and bad investments. The eco-resort that had brought him to Cedarville in the first place had been a scheme to defraud investors, a scheme that had fallen apart before it could be executed. Derek owed money to creditors across 3 states. He had burned through his earnings from the divorce with Susan and was desperately seeking a new source of funds. That source was supposed to be me. The investigator also confirmed the existence of another woman. Her name was Victoria Chen, a real estate developer who had been seeing Derek for the past 2 years. According to the evidence, Derek had promised to marry Victoria once he was free of me using my inheritance to pay off his debts and start fresh. The depths of his deception were breathtaking. Every kind word, every romantic gesture, every promise of forever had been calculated manipulation. I had been nothing but a target, a mark, a means to an end. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt liberated. The truth, as ugly as it was, set me free. I no longer needed to wonder what I had done wrong or how I could have saved my marriage. There had never been a real marriage to save, just a con that had finally reached its expiration date. The next chapter of my life began in my father's workshop. For the first few weeks after the funeral, I could not bring myself to go inside. The workshop was so deeply associated with my father that entering it felt like confronting his absence in the most painful way possible. But eventually, I knew I had to face it. The business did not stop running just because I was grieving. The first time I walked through those familiar doors, I broke down completely. I sank to my knees on the sawdust-covered floor and sobbed until I had nothing left. I let myself grieve not just for my father, but for the marriage I thought I had, for the future I had imagined, for all the losses piling on top of each other. When the tears finally stopped, I stood up, wiped my face, and got to work. Running Harrison Woodworks on my own was challenging, but I threw myself into it with everything I had. I implemented the business strategies I had learned in college, streamlining operations, expanding our online presence, reaching out to new markets. I hired a social media manager to showcase our craftsmanship to a wider audience. I developed relationships with interior designers and architects who appreciated custom handmade furniture. Within 6 months, our revenue had doubled. Within a year, we were featured in a national design magazine, and orders were pouring in from across the country. What my father had built was thriving in ways he might never have imagined. But business success was only part of my transformation. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. Women I had known since childhood who welcomed me back without judgment, who reminded me of who I was before Derek had tried to reshape me into someone smaller. We had dinners and hiking trips and long conversations that lasted until midnight. I started running every morning, something I had given up when Derek complained that exercise made me unavailable during the hours he wanted attention. The physical exertion cleared my head and strengthened my body. By the end of the first month, I was running 5 miles every day. By the end of the third month, I was training for a half marathon. I took a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try but had dismissed as frivolous. I discovered I was terrible at throwing clay, but I loved the process anyway. The imperfect bowls and lopsided mugs I created became sources of pride rather than embarrassment. I learned to play guitar, finally picking up the instrument Thomas had tried to teach me years ago. My brother sent me instructional videos and cheered my progress through regular video calls. Our relationship, strained by years of geographic and emotional distance, began to heal. Slowly, I rediscovered who I was outside the context of being someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's caretaker. I remembered that I was funny and creative and capable. I remembered that I had dreams that had nothing to do with any man. I remembered that I deserved more than being a target for a con artist's scheme. One afternoon, about 8 months after my father's death, I was working in the showroom when a man walked in with a limping golden retriever. His name was Daniel, and he was the new veterinarian in town. He had heard about our furniture and wanted to commission a custom desk for his clinic. But his dog, a rescue named Murphy, had stepped on something sharp during their walk and was bleeding all over the floor. I helped him clean and bandage Murphy's paw, ignoring the drops of blood on our display pieces focused only on the injured animal. Daniel was grateful, apologetic, and absolutely mortified by the mess his dog had made. "Please let me pay for the cleaning," he insisted, "or the furniture, or whatever." "Just come back and order that desk," I said. "That will be payment enough." He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Daniel was nothing like Derek. Where Derek had been smooth and polished, Daniel was earnest and slightly awkward. Where Derek had bragged about his accomplishments, Daniel deflected compliments and asked questions about others. Where Derek's attention had felt like a spotlight, Daniel's presence felt like sunshine. We started dating slowly, carefully. I told him about my divorce, about Derek, about everything I had been through. He listened without judgment, held my hand when the memories got painful, and never once made me feel like damaged goods. "You survived a predator," he said one evening. "That does not make you weak. It makes you strong." For the first time since my father's death, I felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. Meanwhile, Derek's life was collapsing. Word reached me through various channels about his downfall. His architectural firm had officially filed for bankruptcy. Creditors were pursuing him for unpaid debts. Victoria had discovered his lies and dumped him publicly, reportedly at a restaurant filled with colleagues and acquaintances. He began calling me, leaving voicemails that started out angry and gradually became desperate. He claimed he had made a mistake. He said he still loved me. He begged for another chance. I deleted every message without responding. Then one day, he showed up in Cedarville. I was in the workshop reviewing designs with one of our master craftsmen when one of the employees came in to tell me someone was asking for me at the front. When I walked into the showroom, Derek was standing there looking nothing like the polished man who had once swept me off my feet. He had lost weight, and not in a healthy way. His suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt, his eyes red from what might have been tears or alcohol or sleepless nights. He looked like a man who had lost everything, which I realized was exactly what he was. "Rosa," he said, his voice cracking, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms. "We have nothing to talk about." I made a mistake, a huge mistake. I see that now. Everything I did serving you papers at the funeral, all of it, I was wrong. I was greedy and stupid, and I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. I let him talk. I watched him plead and grovel and make promises he could never keep. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just emptiness where feelings for him used to live. When he finished, I spoke calmly. "You did not make a mistake, Derek. You executed a plan to marry a woman for her money, to wait until she was most vulnerable, and to take everything you could get. The only mistake you made was choosing a target whose father was smarter than you." He started to argue, but I held up my hand. "I am not angry anymore. Being angry at you would mean you still matter to me, and you do not. You are a con artist who failed at his con. That is all you are. Now I need you to leave my property and never come back." "Rosa, please. If you are not gone in 60 seconds, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." He stared at me, searching my face for any sign of the naive woman he had manipulated so easily. He did not find her. She was gone, replaced by someone harder and wiser and completely immune to his tactics. Derek left without another word. I watched him drive away, then went back to work. There were orders to fill designs to approve a business to run. I did not have time to waste on people who no longer mattered. 2 years have passed since my father's funeral. I am sitting in the workshop as I tell you this story, surrounded by the tools and materials of generations of Harrisons. The smell of sawdust fills my lungs with every breath. Sunlight streams through the windows, illuminating particles floating in the air like tiny dancers. So much has changed since that terrible day at the cemetery. Harrison Woodworks is thriving beyond anything my father could have imagined. We've expanded into a second building, hired 12 new craftspeople, and developed a line of signature pieces that has become recognizable across the country. Last month, we were approached by a major hotel chain about furnishing their entire West Coast portfolio. My father's dream has become something bigger than even he envisioned. I opened a program called Henry's Legacy 6 months ago, an apprenticeship initiative for young people in our community who want to learn traditional woodworking skills. Every time I watch a teenager discover the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with their hands, I feel my father's presence beside me, smiling with pride. Thomas moved back to Cedarville last spring. His music career never took off the way he hoped, but he found something better: peace. He works part-time at the workshop handling our social media and marketing, while pursuing music on the side. Our relationship, fractured for so many years, has finally healed. Daniel and I got engaged last month. He proposed in the workshop, surrounded by the furniture my father spent his life creating, with a ring placed in a small wooden box I had made with my own hands. It was not flashy or elaborate. It was perfect. We are planning a simple wedding next spring here in Cedarville, surrounded only by people who genuinely love us. No fancy restaurants, no string quartets, no appearances to maintain. Just 2 people committing to build a life together honestly and openly and without hidden agendas. The journey from that moment at my father's grave to this moment in his workshop has been long and painful and transformative. I am not the same woman who signed those divorce papers without a word. I am stronger. I am wiser. I am more fully myself than I have ever been. Sometimes I take out the letter my father left me, the one Richard Palmer gave me after the estate was settled. I have read it so many times that the paper is wearing thin at the folds. "Dear Rosie," it begins. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry I cannot be there to help you through whatever comes next. But I need you to know something important. I see you. I have always seen you. not just your accomplishments, although I am prouder of those than you will ever know. I see your heart, your strength, your capacity for love. I see the woman you have become and the woman you are still becoming. There will be people in your life who try to diminish you, who try to make you forget your worth, who see you as a means to an end. I hope I have given you the tools to recognize them and protect yourself from them. But even if they manage to hurt you, remember this: you have survived everything that has ever tried to break you. You will survive this too. Never forget your worth. Never let anyone make you feel small. And never stop building, whether it is furniture or friendships or a life worth living. I love you more than words can say. Dad. I keep that letter in my desk drawer next to a small wooden box my father made for me when I was 10 years old. Every time I feel lost or afraid or uncertain, I read those words and remember who I am. The lesson I carry from everything I have been through is this: sometimes the worst moments of your life become the doorways to the best ones. Derek thought he was destroying me when he served me those papers at my father's funeral. Instead, he set me free. He gave me the gift of seeing clearly, of understanding my own worth, of building a life that belongs entirely to me. I do not hate Derek anymore. Hating him would require caring about him, and I do not. He is simply a chapter that ended a lesson that was learned, a scar that has faded into something I barely notice anymore. What I do carry with me every single day is gratitude. Gratitude for my father, who loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. Gratitude for the life I have built from the ashes of the one that burned down. Gratitude for the knowledge that I am exactly who I need to be, and I need no one's permission or approval to exist. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed at your most vulnerable moment? How did you find the strength to move forward? And what would you say to someone who is going through something similar right now? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like so more people can find it. Share it with a friend who might need a reminder of their own worth. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for being here with me, for listening, for being part of this journey. I am grateful for every single one of you. I wish you strength in your struggles, wisdom in your decisions, and the courage to never forget your own worth, no matter who tries to make you forget. Take care of yourselves and each other. Until next time.